Helen Rivas is a 32-year-old mother of three who works full-time as a secretary in a pharmaceutical company, but barely earns enough to make ends meet. Ms. Rivas lives in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., in Montgomery County, one of the wealthiest counties in the country. At the moment, vouchers from a housing program cover 70% of her rent.
I feel like if I was to currently not be in this program, I would only work for rent. I wouldn't work for a life. I would work for the bill only. Or probably I would have to skip one bill one month to pay the next month. That's how I would be juggling.
Many consider poverty to be an urban or rural phenomenon. But America's suburbs are now home to its biggest and fastest growing poor population. Between 2000 and 2010, the number of people living below the federal poverty line in the suburbs grew by 53%, compared with just 23% in cities.
And it was a much greater differential than we'd seen in prior decades, and I think reflected the fact that suburbs were suffering not just alongside cities, but in some cases even more than cities because of the character of the recession, because of the way suburbs are changing demographically, and just because of the way that suburbs are aging too.
As cities grow safer and richer, they've become more expensive, pricing out the urban poor. In many cities, people who used to live in urban housing projects have instead started receiving housing vouchers and have moved to the suburbs. Then there are the newly poor, middle-class families in middle-class communities who've been affected by the mortgage bubble and the recessions that bracketed the last decade. The suburbs also attract immigrants, among whom the poverty rate is higher than it is among the native-born. Today, 51% of immigrants live in the suburbs, compared with just 33% in cities. David Melendez was born in America, but he spent the last 17 years working as a taxi driver in Honduras. He earned a decent income, but he fled the country after receiving death threats from local gang members. He moved to Montgomery County and had to start anew.
I became homeless with 3 daughters, without place to stay.
Mr. Melendez is temporarily living in a shelter, which also provides free meals and childcare. The county gives him $697 a month and educational training so he can get his high school equivalency. In return, he volunteers for 40 hours a week at the county's social service office, helping Spanish-speaking clients. He still manages to save $180 each month.
I'm in the middle with a poor family. I cannot afford many of the things they're asking for. The apartment too expensive. Even townhouses or whatever, they are too expensive. I cannot afford that now because I don't have an income. The only income I have is what I receive from TCA. It's not enough.
Mr. Melendez's dream is to buy a car. With one, it would take him 25 minutes to get to work. Without one, he's forced to rely on the bus. He currently spends close to 4 hours getting to and from work.
When I go to apply for the different places, they ask me for be there early in the morning. That's impossible for my 3 daughters.
Patchy public transport services are just one of the obstacles that the suburban poor face. Unlike cities, suburbs can sprawl across political boundaries, which makes coordinating responses to problems difficult. The rapid rise in the number of suburban poor is straining resources. Grant-making organisations are often used to focusing on urban rather than suburban poverty. As a result, safety nets in the suburbs can be thin. Despite the difficulties, the poor stay in suburbs for many of the same reasons their neighbours do: safety, better schools, and in many cases, more affordable housing. And while suburban construction and manufacturing jobs dried up in the middle of last decade, these days, suburbia is where the jobs are.
When my daughters look at me, when we talk together, they push me. Many times my older daughters say to me, "Daddy, you can make it. Daddy, we can go forward. Daddy, I know it's hard for you now, but I'm going to help you."
The country needs to bolster its anti-poverty infrastructure to reflect the growth in suburban poverty, and aid organisations need to find better ways to reach out to people like Helen Rivas and David Melendez. The reality is that for many people living in the suburbs, the American dream remains elusive.
The Economist.